Her daughter-in-law hurled the cane across the room like it was trash. Judith Hartman, 72, didn't flinch. She memorized the angle and the silence that followed. By the time Alyssa mocked her memory on speakerphone, Judith had already placed the recorder. She'd raised a son, buried a husband, and signed a house over in trust. Now she was taking it all back, digit by digit, file by file. And when they came for what they thought they owned, Judith answered with evidence. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The sound it made wasn't loud, more like a dull clack against the hardwood, barely louder than the ticking of the kitchen clock. But in that moment, it was thunder. Judith watched as her cane, light oak, rubber-tipped, carefully balanced by years of habit, hit the floor, bounced once, and skidded across the living room, coming to rest beneath the radiator. Alyssa had thrown it without looking, just a flick of her wrist, casual as a napkin tossed after dinner. God, Alyssa muttered, arms folded tight across her chest. This house is already full of junk. That thing's just one more piece. Judith didn't speak. Daniel stood near the hallway, still in his work clothes. His fingers twitched at his side, but he didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched the scene unfold with the exhausted terror of a man long broken in private. Judith stared at her cane. Her hip throbbed. Old fracture, healed wrong. Mornings were the worst. She had leaned on that cane to get her coffee, to reach the front door, to not cry out loud when she climbed the stairs. Now it lay where it didn't belong, like her. Alyssa turned on her heel, heels clicking down the hallway. Maybe it's time we clear things out around here. God knows it's not a museum. Silence stretched like plastic wrap around the room, tight, invisible, suffocating. Judith moved slowly, lowering herself with care. Her knees protested. She reached beneath the radiator and wrapped her hand around the cane. The wood was warm from the floor heat. She lifted it upright, letting it steady her weight once more. Dignity, bruised, more than her hip ever had been. She didn't look at Daniel. Not now. Not while his guilt and fear and silence were still trying to sort themselves into human form. Instead, she walked, measured and silent, to the den. The door creaked shut behind her. Inside, it was cooler, darker. The air smelled faintly of dust and old lemon polish. Judith ran a hand over the worn arm of her late husband's recliner. This had been their house, hers and George's. He'd called it the final miracle, a place they'd stumbled on during a retirement trip nearly 20 years ago. 1 acre, cedar beams, a fireplace that actually worked. He'd died 6 years ago before they could finish painting the guest room. Alyssa and Daniel had moved in a year later, promising to help manage the property. Promises were cheap in this house now. Judith crossed to the small secretary desk tucked beside the bookcase. Its bottom drawer stuck, like always, and she gave it the familiar hip bump to get it open. Inside, envelopes, a roll of postage stamps, a forgotten pair of reading glasses, and the manila folder. She pulled it out slowly, hands steady despite the pressure in her chest. On the tab, gift deed, house title, notarized. She'd had it drawn up quietly. Dana, her friend from the community center, had walked her through the paperwork. It hadn't been filed, not yet, but everything was legal, signed, dated. She ran her thumb over the embossed notary seal. Outside, a door slammed. Alyssa's voice rang out, sharp and impatient. Judith didn't move. She slipped the folder back into the drawer, closed it softly, then sat in George's chair, let the cane rest across her lap. This house wasn't a museum, it was a fuse, and tonight she'd felt the first snap of heat. It had been a Wednesday, gray-skied and half-forgotten, when Judith signed the deed. Daniel sat across from her at the kitchen table, collar askew, fingers nervously tapping his coffee mug. "It's just paperwork, Mom. Standard transfer," he said, "in case anything ever happens. I'd hate to see the house tied up in probate." He'd worn that boyish tone she used to fall for when he was 8, and apologizing for breaking the porch lamp. She'd just lost George 3 months earlier. The house echoed in strange ways then. Light bulbs went out faster. Steps creaked louder. Loneliness makes fools of the smart. So she signed. She hadn't asked for Alyssa's name to be added. But it was there on the second page, smaller print, but just as binding. Within a year, Alyssa started changing things. First the shutters, then the landscaping, then the HOA. She lobbied for presidency in a neighborhood where Judith used to bake pies for everyone on the block. Now she watched through the blinds as Alyssa held board meetings in the gazebo George had built with his own hands. The living room, morphed into a modern hosting space. Her floral curtains gone, her oil paintings boxed and forgotten in the garage. Judith was asked, gently of course, to move her recliner and sewing cabinet into the downstairs suite. The suite, that's what Alyssa called it. As if giving the prison a charming name softened its bars. It had once been George's study and Judith's sunroom combined. Now it was a box with a bed, a private bath, and a kitchenette too small to boil water and remember at the same time. Judith said nothing, but she began collecting. Old property tax mail that still bore her name, HOA newsletters with Alyssa's quotes in boldface, receipts, notes, utility bills addressed to current resident. She slid each one into the back of a notebook labeled Health Journal, a decoy. She also began listening. From her suite, she heard things, voices thin as tissue through drywall, laughter that didn't reach Daniel's eyes, and comments like blades. One night, as she sat folding an old dish towel in half for the 5th time, she heard Alyssa's voice float down the stairwell. "When she's gone, we'll gut that whole wing. Open concept. Bright and clean." Daniel didn't answer. He rarely did anymore. Judith didn't cry. She clicked the lid on her pen and flipped her laptop open. The old email account took a moment to load. jhartman55@oakstream.net. She hadn't used it in years, but the password came back like muscle memory. She typed, subject, quiet, legal question, to Gina Wrightlaw at midwestlegalgroup.com. Body, Gina. I hope you're well. I'm writing with a personal inquiry. Let's say a mother gifts her home to her son, trusting him to honor her right to remain there. No formal lease, just blood and belief. Now let's say the daughter-in-law talks about renovations. Posthumously. Would that mother have any rights? Hypothetically, of course. Best, Judith. She hit send. Then closed the laptop and looked around the room. Framed photos of Daniel as a baby still lined her dresser. She didn't remove them. Not yet. Not until she had to. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, tapping softly against the glass. She rose, steadied herself with the cane, and crossed to the old cedar chest beneath the window. Inside, a stack of George's things still sat. Driver's license, veteran's card, dog tags. Judith picked up the tags, rolled the chain between her fingers, and whispered to no one, "They think I'm already gone." She placed the tags back carefully, then closed the chest and locked it. The cafe Gina picked wasn't loud, but it buzzed, with the low murmur of laptop clicks and cappuccino foam hissing in bursts behind the counter. Judith sat at a corner table, a manila envelope tucked tightly under her arm. Her hands were folded neatly, but one thumb tapped the inside of her wrist with restless rhythm. Gina slid into the seat across from her. Clean gray blazer, hair swept into a low knot, eyes sharp behind thin frames. "I read the deed twice," she said without preamble. "You signed full transfer, no life estate clause, no occupancy rider, no lease." Judith exhaled. "I was grieving. I didn't think—" Gina held up a hand, not unkind. "You trusted your son. That's not a crime." Judith said nothing. "But undoing a gift deed?" Gina continued. "It's rare. You need proof, real proof, that it was coerced, that you were misled, or that they've acted in ways that qualify as elder exploitation." Judith's gaze drifted to her coffee. "Define exploitation." "Shady refinancing, isolating you, using your space without your input, talking about you like you're already gone." Gina's tone softened. "Sound familiar?" Judith looked up, eyes steady. "She called my cane clutter." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Gina leaned in. "Start documenting everything. I don't care how small it seems. Date, time, who was in the room, record what you can. Legally, of course. Indiana's a one-party consent state. That includes voice memos." Judith nodded once. She understood subtext. She'd lived through a Cold War marriage and 30 years of school board meetings. Paper trails made power That afternoon, Judith returned home with a brown bag tucked between loaves of sourdough. Inside, 3 pocket-sized digital voice recorders and a new spiral-bound journal. By the end of the week, one recorder was velcroed beneath the hallway shelf, another tucked into the spine of an old Reader's Digest in the living room, and the third slipped into the base of her lamp in the den. She kept the journal in her knitting basket, each entry dated, timed, clipped. April 18th. 7:14 p.m. Alyssa muttered, "Why does she keep the thermostat at 68? We're not subsidizing her memory loss." Daniel didn't respond. April 20th, 5:42 p.m. Heard Alyssa on phone in the foyer. "Once we rip out that old wing, we'll recoup the value in resale. No one wants dated floor plans." Each sentence felt like another stitch in a long, unraveling quilt. Judith also began scanning old insurance policies, tax returns, George's pension forms, even the warranty paperwork on the water heater, just in case. Her corner of the downstairs was now an archive, but it wasn't until the 4th Sunday dinner that the air fully changed. Alyssa set down her wine glass with performative flourish and announced, "We're finally moving forward with the kitchen reno. Refi came through last week. Can you believe the appraisal value jumped that high?" Daniel mumbled a half-hearted, "That's great." Judith blinked slowly. "Refinancing?" she asked, voice light. "On this house?" Alyssa gave a thin smile. "Don't worry, Judith. The bank doesn't expect you to chip in. We took care of it." Judith tilted her head. "What documents did they require?" Alyssa waved her hand. "Everything's electronic now. Signatures, approvals, smooth as butter. You'd be amazed what gets processed without a single piece of paper." That night, Judith didn't sleep. She sat in the den with a printout of a mortgage statement she'd found in the recycling bin. Her name wasn't on it, not even in the boilerplate. The loan had been signed by Daniel and Alyssa. Property value estimated higher than George had ever imagined. She emailed Gina that same night. Subject, "Something you'll want to see." Attachment, PDF, April mortgage summary. Body, "If I was erased, they did it quietly, but not quietly enough." She pressed send. Down the hallway, Alyssa's laugh filtered through the drywall like static. Judith smiled to herself, not from joy, but from recognition. This wasn't just loss anymore, this was leverage. Judith sat at the kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm chamomile and the past pressing down like humidity. Outside, birds chirped at nothing. Inside, she stared at a manila folder marked 1989 to 2003 Mortgage plus Payoff Docs. Her handwriting looked younger, more hopeful. She pulled out the original deed and repayment slips, each one stamped, folded, annotated in George's blocky pen. They'd struggled for years to hold on to this house. 2 layoffs, 1 gallbladder surgery, a near foreclosure in 1995 that they barely outran with borrowed money and panicked prayer. She remembered skipping dental visits so George could make the payment on time. Now someone else had turned it into leverage. Judith unfolded the printed mortgage summary from the recycling bin, the one she'd fished out after Alyssa's dinner declaration. Top corner, home value reassessment, March 2024. Loan total, $198,400. Borrowers, Daniel Hartman and Alyssa Hartman. Judith Hartman? Nowhere. Not even listed as a resident. Her jaw tightened. Not from anger, from clarity. She opened her email and clicked on Gina's response, which had arrived less than an hour after she sent the mortgage PDF. From Gina Wright. Subject, confirmed. Urgent. Judith, I just ran the mortgage packet through 2 tools. They didn't just leave your name off, they used your social security number to verify occupancy continuity. That's identity misuse, possibly fraud, especially if you didn't sign anything. Sit tight. Don't confront them yet. Start compiling every doc with your SSN or signature. This just got real. Judith didn't reply. She just turned off the screen and stared at her own reflection in the black glass. Alyssa had used her to secure better loan terms. Judith had unknowingly authenticated a scheme with her existence. The kitchen smelled like overripe bananas and stainless steel polish. things Alyssa claimed gave the house a premium listing feel. Judith stood and made her way to the cedar chest again. Inside were George's tax files. She pulled one marked 2001 and compared his writing to Daniel's on the refinance signature. Daniel had tried to mimic it. The slant, the capital H, not perfect, but enough for a lazy notary to shrug it through. Judith pressed her palm flat against the paper. "You forged your father's ghost." That night, after Alyssa went upstairs and Daniel retreated into his nothing-silent office, Judith logged into her online bank account and moved $48,000, her entire savings, into a new credit union account she'd opened 2 weeks ago under the name Judith E. Hartman. Not just Judith Hartman. The extra initial had passed unnoticed. She left the minimum balance in her old bank, enough to keep it from flagging. Then she printed out every insurance policy still in her name, highlighted her SSN, and clipped them neatly together with a blue binder clip. She wrote, "Evidence ID misuse" on the front. Her hands didn't shake. She opened her journal, April 22nd at 10:56 p.m. "My house paid for their Belize trip. My name signed a kitchen remodel I never approved. I have no power. And yet, I have everything I need." She capped the pen and stared out the small window above her bed. Moonlight stretched in, thin and precise. This wasn't the kind of rage that screamed. This was the kind that filed things and kept going. The dining room smelled like rosemary, gravy, and tension baked under foil. Judith stood at the threshold for a long moment, scanning the table. 12 place settings, china plates pulled from the high shelf, wine glasses at every seat, except the one set for her. It was at the card table in the corner. Alyssa had draped a yellow plastic tablecloth over it and placed 2 booster seats next to a single armless chair. "Oh," Alyssa said brightly, spotting her, "we didn't think you'd want to sit near the wine. It's loud over there." She pointed to the main table with a grin that asked for compliance, not understanding. Judith walked over and sat without a word. Her cane rested across her lap like a bayonet. The children had no interest in small talk. One was already watching cartoons on a tablet with the volume low. The other smeared mashed potatoes into a paper turkey cutout. Judith folded her napkin slowly and reminded herself, watch, listen, record. Alyssa passed through the room like she owned air itself, tossing off comments as she checked the oven and flicked at imaginary crumbs. "So much clutter in this house," she sighed once, louder than needed. "After the holidays, I swear we're doing a full sweep. Might finally clear out that back suite. Turn it into something open and airy." Judith chewed slowly. She'd set a recorder into her pocket earlier, disguised as a pill case. From her seat, she could see Alyssa's laptop on the sideboard. It was open, a blueprint displayed on screen. She squinted. The layout was unmistakable. The suite, walls removed, bathroom gutted, closet repurposed into a wine bar. She wasn't supposed to see that. "Smells great," came a voice from the front door. Reggie, Daniel's old friend from undergrad, now a semi-retired CPA with a gut that arrived a half-second before the rest of him. He clapped Daniel on the back and handed over a bottle of Cabernet. Alyssa beamed. "You're just in time." Reggie grinned, then looked at Judith with a warm, practiced kindness. "Hey, Mrs. H, still keeping these 2 in line?" She smiled back, small but sharp. "Someone has to." They all laughed, except Daniel, who looked like he was breathing through a paper bag in his head. Later, when the pie came out and the conversation turned toward mortgage rates and digital portfolios, Reggie leaned toward Judith under the pretense of passing the whipped cream. "Off the record," he murmured. "Daniel's name's come up. Not great. Lot of reshuffling at the firm. Compliance is sniffing through files." Judith blinked. "How interesting." She spooned a modest dollop onto her slice and handed the bowl back. That night, after the guests left and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Judith returned to her room. She peeled off her cardigan, untucked the audio recorder from her pocket, and plugged it into the old laptop she kept behind her dresser. A soft ding. 5 new files. Dinner. The blueprint comment. Alyssa's downsizing remark. Reggie's warning. The scrape of her own knife on the porcelain. She uploaded them all to the encrypted drive Gina had set up for her on a cloud server called Frostbox. Folder title, JH Evidence, Passive Phase. She made 2 backups, one on a flash drive tucked behind George's dog tags, one on a password-protected phone Dana had mailed her, disguised in a fall recipes envelope. The last entry she saved was Reggie's voice. "Compliance is sniffing." She sat back. The kids' table, the fake cheer, the renovation plans under her nose. Let them think she was old, invisible. Let them think they were winning. They were building an open-concept grave for themselves, and she was recording every nail. Judith didn't sleep much anymore. Not for fear, but for clarity. The house had a rhythm. Doors creaked a certain way. Alyssa's heels clicked twice on the upstairs landing before descending. Daniel's footsteps paused outside her suite, like he meant to knock and always changed his mind. Judith had learned to listen in the quiet hours. That's when truth slipped out unpolished. It was just after 11 p.m. when she heard Alyssa's voice carry through the vent. "She's not going to make it another year. I mean, be real. We should look into assisted care now while she's still semi-coherent." Judith froze mid-page, pen paused in her lap. The journal lay open. December 3rd, 11:07 p.m. "I already downloaded a few places. They'll take her social and run a financial assessment. I think we can make it sound voluntary." Judith reached under the table and tapped the small recorder velcroed beneath the drawer. The voice continued. "We just say she's forgetful, you know? Getting turned around, missing appointments." Judith's hand didn't shake. She simply underlined the words, "financial assessment." The next morning, while Alyssa was at a Pilates class and Daniel off to work with the brittle cheer of a man pretending not to be audited, Judith placed a new recorder behind the vanity mirror in the upstairs guest bathroom. She masked it with a sachet of lavender sachet and some loose potpourri, Alyssa's own supplies. She barely made it down the stairs before hearing the front door open. That evening, Judith turned the volume low and reviewed the playback on her laptop. Alyssa, on speakerphone, laughing. "I swear sometimes she smells like mothballs and Vicks. I walked in the other day, and it was like walking into 1942, another voice. Unfamiliar. Don't you feel bad?" Alyssa. "Please, she's lived a long life. We're the ones doing the heavy lifting now. I mean, do you know how much space that woman's crap takes up?" Judith paused the file, clicked save, labeled it, Voice Mirror 12.4.wave. She scrolled through the drive. 1 month of recordings now, 17 files, 8 entries marked coercive tone, 5 marked verbal degradation, 2 marked refinance reference, 1 marked threat. She exhaled, not in relief, but in readiness. The next day, as Judith carefully folded her laundry, the doorbell rang. It was Jill from the HOA. Maroon scarf, wide brim hat, clipboard always half full. She smiled awkwardly as Judith stepped into the doorway. "Hey," Jill said. "We were finalizing minutes from the last meeting and I just wanted to confirm, Alyssa told us she'll be sole owner by spring, that the suite's going to be repurposed into an art gallery or wine lounge." Judith blinked. Did she now? "Yeah," she said. "Well, never mind. Maybe she's getting ahead of herself." "No, Jill," Judith said softly. "She always does." That night, Judith sat at George's old desk and pulled out 2 documents she'd kept under lock for years. The first was a rough draft of her will. The second was her old power of attorney designation, still listing Daniel, signed in 2008. She dialed Gina from the landline because she didn't trust the Wi-Fi. "You free tomorrow?" Judith asked. "I'll make time," Gina replied. By noon the next day, they sat at a local notary's office. Gina slid the papers across the table. Judith's name was clean and centered on the top line. Power of attorney, Gina Wright, Esc will, revised, control transferred to an irrevocable trust under Judith E. Hartman. "If anything happens," Judith said, "you open the frost box. You'll find it all there." Gina nodded. "This time you hold the leash." Judith reached into her purse and pulled out a new pen, heavy, brass, monogrammed, a gift to herself. She signed both documents. Behind her, the notary stamped and sealed. Outside, sleet whispered against the glass like it was trying not to be heard. Judith stood, coat already buttoned. "They think thin walls mean weak bones," she said, eyes locked on the street outside. They forgot thin walls also let truth travel. And she walked into the cold, not to escape, but to move forward. The lawyer Gina introduced wasn't what Judith expected. Tall, maybe mid-30s, with a shaved head and a beat-up leather satchel, he looked more like a tattooed barista than a property fraud specialist. But when he spoke, he didn't waste a syllable. "Name's Travis Marr. I've seen 3 cases this year just like yours, but none of them came with a digital war chest like this," he said, tapping his laptop as he scanned through Judith's Frostbox archive. Judith sat across from him at Gina's office conference table, hands folded, glasses low on her nose. "You think it's enough?" He nodded. "The recordings help, the forged refi docs help more, but the Social Security misuse?" He whistled through his teeth. "That's federal." Gina leaned in. "He'll draft the injunction this week, petition to freeze all further activity tied to the property, renovations, additional liens, equity loans, everything." "Won't they be notified?" Judith asked. Travis smiled. "Oh, they'll find out, just not before the freeze hits." Back home, Judith dialed up the fragility. She let the cane clatter once on purpose, faked a moment of confusion in the pantry, asked Alyssa the same question twice. "Oh, bless," Alyssa muttered under her breath, smiling too wide. "You're just having a day, aren't you?" Judith nodded, eyes glassy. "It's hard to keep track sometimes." She watched Alyssa's guard lower a fraction. That was all Judith needed. Daniel, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own slow collapse. He left late for work, came home earlier than usual, spent hours in his study staring at unopened mail. At dinner, he picked at his food and snapped at the dog for barking. Judith heard him on the phone one night, muffled, desperate. She said they're rechecking everything. "No, I don't know why now. I thought it was approved." Judith logged the date and time, marked the entry, strain manifesting. By midweek, Travis sent confirmation. Email subject, found it. Body. We traced the IP address tied to the online mortgage portal login, the one used to submit the loan refinance docs last February. It pinged from your Wi-Fi, yes, but the MAC address matches Alyssa's MacBook Air. Timestamp matches a morning when you were at your church group. Translation, she filed it herself. Judith read the message twice, then again. She didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She saved the email as a PDF and dropped it into the Frostbox folder labeled Digital, Confirmed Misuse. Then she poured herself a glass of lemonade and sat by the window, letting the early winter sun warm her knuckles. The next crack came Friday afternoon. Judith was arranging her medication tray when Alyssa's shrill voice exploded from upstairs. "What do you mean it's frozen?" She slammed a door, then another. "I don't care what kind of petition it is. This is our home. We're mid-remodel. Do you understand what mid means?" Judith kept arranging her pill tray, color-coded, perfectly calm. Moments later, Alyssa stormed past her suite, muttering, "This is unbelievable," under her breath. She didn't look down. She didn't even pretend to be cordial. Just stomped into the kitchen and began angrily clattering pans. Judith waited until the microwave beeped, then slowly reached under her cushion and clicked the recorder on again. She didn't need more evidence, but she wasn't done collecting. That night, Gina called. "They're rattled, which means it's working. But we need to move carefully now. She'll go looking for the leak." "I am the leak," Judith said, voice even, "and I've patched myself tighter than she knows." "Then we keep going," Gina replied. Judith stared out at the bare trees lining the backyard. Their shadows stretched long across the lawn, fingers reaching toward the house. "She's already started to panic," Judith said quietly. "Let's see how clean she is when she's afraid." And she hung up, without smiling, without blinking. It arrived in a plain white envelope marked confidential. Not certified, not flashy, just official enough to carry weight. Alyssa tore it open at the kitchen island, one manicured nail snapping against the glue strip. Judith watched from the archway, pretending to wipe down her cane with a tissue. The color drained from Alyssa's face. Her lips moved silently as she skimmed. Then she made a choking noise low in her throat. "This is from the State Fraud Unit," she whispered. "What the hell?" Daniel appeared from the hallway, eyes already wide. "What's going on?" She held up the letter, paper shaking slightly. "They're reviewing the mortgage filing. There's a flagged SSN discrepancy. They're saying it might qualify as elder exploitation." Judith folded her tissue once, then again. "Interesting," she murmured, and turned back toward her suite. By evening, Daniel knocked. Not Alyssa. Daniel. He even waited for her to answer. She opened the door slowly, letting him see the soft lamp glow and a kettle steaming on the warmer. "Mom," he said, voice dry, "can we talk?" She didn't invite him in, just raised an eyebrow. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't know everything. I trusted her. I thought we were just streamlining things, renovating, making plans for the future. I didn't realize she—" Judith held up a hand. "You stood there while she threw my cane." Daniel blinked. "What?" "You were 10 feet away, silent. That morning she called it junk." Her voice was soft, measured. "I remember exactly how far you didn't move." He stepped back like she'd slapped him. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did." He looked down, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Gina sent a letter. Mediation. Is that really necessary?" "It's overdue," she said. The next day, Gina's formal mediation letter arrived by courier. Alyssa opened it while pacing in her robe, coffee half sipped, hair still clipped from sleep. "Judith Hartman is willing to discuss terms of restitution, occupancy rights, and title revision under supervised legal mediation," she read aloud, voice dripping with disbelief. "Restitution? You want money now?" Judith looked up from her book. "I want my name back." "Then take the damn house," Alyssa shouted, slamming the letter on the counter. "You want square footage and dust? Fine, but don't pretend you're some innocent victim in all this. You're a manipulative, passive-aggressive—" Judith stood, slowly, the way she always had, with quiet balance, not apology. "This was my home," she said. "I bled to keep it. You redesigned it like it was your Pinterest board." Alyssa's mouth twitched. "You think you're some kind of warrior now? Recording things? Sending lawyers? You're just bitter you're not in control anymore." "No," Judith said calmly. "I'm bitter because I trusted you with comfort, and you served me silence. You used me for paper and profit." "We offered a buyout," Alyssa hissed. "We could still—" "I'm not for sale," Judith snapped. Her voice, sharp as flint, cut the air in two. There was a pause. Then Alyssa screamed, a full, primal, undignified sound. She shoved the letter onto the floor, grabbed her phone and stomped upstairs, muttering, "This is war. This is fucksing war." Judith bent and picked up the mediation letter, smoothed the edges. She slid it back into its envelope, then walked it into the den and filed it beneath a tab labeled Counterplay, Phase 2. She didn't shake, didn't gloat, just documented. The trap had been laid weeks ago. She'd simply waited for the pressure to do its job. Now they were the ones flailing, and she was the one holding the pen. The first blow didn't come by letter, it came by email. Subject, urgent. State licensing review, notice sender, Indiana Dept, of real estate oversight. Alyssa read it at the kitchen island, face cast in the blue-white glow of her screen. Judith passed quietly behind her, carrying a stack of folded towels, eyes grazing the countertop just long enough to see the header. Alyssa slammed the laptop shut. "Everything okay?" Judith asked sweetly. Alyssa didn't answer. Just stood there for a second too long, hands trembling before she snatched up her phone and disappeared into the backyard. That evening, Daniel was unshaven and tight-lipped over dinner. He pushed green beans around his plate and ignored Alyssa's nervous ramble about siding quotes and cabinet finishes. Judith poured herself a glass of water, slow and steady. Daniel finally broke the silence. "My credit score dropped 100 points this week." Alyssa looked up, mouth parted. "I checked. It's the fraud alert, the legal stuff." He blinked hard. "I might lose my position if they don't clear it soon." "You were the one who co-signed," Alyssa snapped. You agreed. You said it was fine. I said we should slow down. His voice cracked. You steamrolled. Judith stood and took her plate to the sink. Calm, methodical. Not even glancing back. She didn't need to. The fracture was growing. 2 days later, Jill rang the doorbell. It was early, before noon, and Judith was already dressed, cane polished, journals set aside. Jill wore her HOA polo and a strange expression, something between fury and disbelief. She tried to bribe me, Jill said flatly. Judith gestured toward the porch swing. Sit down. Tell me everything. She cornered me in the cul-de-sac, said you were old and paranoid, that you'd been slipping lately, asked if I'd sign a statement saying you'd told me you planned to move into assisted living within the year. Jill's eyes were hard. Offered me a free home appraisal and wine of the month. Judith didn't smile, just opened the notebook resting on her lap and wrote, December 11th, 10:42 a.m. Jill confirms attempted witness manipulation, then underlined the last 2 words. She really thinks this will end clean, Jill muttered. No, Judith said softly. She just thinks it won't end with her. That night the walls pulsed again, not with footsteps or vents but arguments. You're ruining everything, Alyssa spat. This was supposed to be our home. It's still our home, Daniel said, voice frayed. We just shouldn't have taken so much. You mean I shouldn't have taken so much? That's what you're saying. I didn't say that. You didn't stop it either. There was a pause. A long one. Then Alyssa. You're acting like she's the victim. Like you owe her something. Daniel's voice came lower now. She raised me. In this house. You're just angry she raised herself back. Judith didn't move from her chair. She just clicked, record. Again. Outside her window, the porch light flickered once. Then steadied. Inside, a woman who had once been silenced by manners and motherhood kept listening, collecting, and waiting, not for justice to arrive, but for them to run out of places to hide. They called her into the living room like it was an intervention. Judith entered slowly, cane in hand, face unreadable. She noted the way Daniel couldn't meet her eyes, how Alyssa stood near the mantel with her arms crossed like a lawyer prepping for cross-examination. A single legal pad sat on the coffee table. Not a family meeting, a performance. Daniel cleared his throat first. Mom, we need to talk about all of this. Judith said nothing. She lowered herself into the armchair by the window, took her time adjusting the throw pillow behind her back. We feel, Alyssa began, her voice too smooth, that it's time to stop escalating. The legal stuff is hurting everyone, not just us. I mean, the stress isn't good for your... She gestured vaguely toward Judith's knees. Health. Judith tilted her head. Daniel jumped in. This house. What we all have. It can't survive if we keep pushing each other into corners. Maybe we were wrong about some things, but suing your own family... Judith raised one hand, palm outward, then reached into the basket beside her chair and retrieved a small battered recorder. She clicked play. Alyssa's voice poured into the quiet like vinegar. I swear, sometimes she smells like mothballs and Vicks. I walked in the other day, and it was like walking into 1942, then the second clip. Do you know how much space that woman's crap takes up? And a third. We'll make it sound voluntary. She's losing it anyway. Silence swallowed the room. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a man who'd just discovered he was standing on broken glass barefoot. Alyssa, he whispered. What is that? Alyssa was already shaking her head. Out of context. You know how she edits things. This is edited. It's not, Judith said softly. Daniel's jaw clenched. His gaze drifted toward the window, then to the floor. Judith reached into her cardigan pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. She laid it on the coffee table. This is your 30-day notice. Legally served. The property has been retitled. Alyssa snapped to attention. Excuse me? I bought out the mortgage balance yesterday, cashed my pension early. The deed is clean now. No liens, no loopholes. You don't have that kind of money, Alyssa spat. You never asked what George left me, Judith said. Or what I kept after, or what I earned the hard way. Daniel looked like he might crumble right there. Judith studied him, her voice quieter now. I gave you everything, Daniel. The home, the history. My name on a dotted line you never earned. And you stood in this room while she gutted me in front of you. One blueprint and power play at a time. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he murmured. I thought I could fix it. You let her drown me in silence and called it peace. Alyssa stepped forward, fists clenched. You can't do this. You don't have the spine. Judith stood, cane pressing into the rug. Her eyes, clear and unsparing, met Alyssa's. I had the spine when I buried a husband and paid off a house with checkbooks and casseroles. I had it when I watched my son disappear behind closed doors. I had it when you threw my cane and called it clutter. She stepped closer. And I have it now. Alyssa opened her mouth, but no words came. Daniel covered his face with both hands. A muffled sound, half sob, half breath, leaked through his fingers. Judith turned and walked toward the hallway. Her voice floated back over her shoulder. You have until the end of the month. After that, I change the locks. No one followed her, not even their pride. The first day, Alyssa didn't come home. No note, no call. Just a silence that stretched across the house like a tarp pulled too tight. Daniel paced the hallway, phone in hand, checking every 15 minutes for a text that didn't come. He left voicemails, first calm, then clipped, then desperate. Judith heard them all from her suite, door cracked just enough to listen. By the second day, he filed a missing person report. She's never done this before, he told the officer who came by, trying to mask his panic with formality. I mean, she gets dramatic, but not like this. The officer took notes, nodded, offered boilerplate assurances. Judith made tea and set a cup by the door of her suite. She didn't speak to Daniel. Not yet. There was nothing left to say. That night, rain tapped against the roof like fingers testing for leaks. Alyssa returned at 2:14 a.m. Judith knew the exact time because the slamming of the front door jolted her awake. Footsteps thundered down the hall, clumsy and jagged. Something crashed in the kitchen, a bottle maybe, then the unmistakable clink of glass against tile. Judith got up and opened her door. Alyssa stood barefoot in the living room, soaked through and swaying slightly, one hand gripping a half-empty bottle of red wine. There she is, Alyssa slurred, the queen of consequences. Her hair was frizzed at the ends, makeup streaked down one cheek like war paint. Her eyes were wild. You know what's funny? She said, wobbling toward the bookshelf. This house doesn't even feel like mine anymore. All that effort, all that design, the upgrades, the fixtures, I did everything, and now I'm the villain? She snatched something from the shelf. Judith's wedding photo, George in his suit, Judith in her tea-length lace gown, black and white, framed in brass. You built this whole shrine on guilt, Alyssa sneered. Well, here's your legacy. And with a swing that was almost graceful, she hurled the frame into the fireplace. The glass shattered. The photo curled immediately, corner catching first. Flame raced through the paper like it had been waiting for release. Judith didn't flinch. She simply turned and walked to the landline, dialed 3 numbers. By the time the police arrived, Alyssa was on the floor, yelling about betrayal and backstabbing. A neighbor across the street had already called in the noise as a possible domestic disturbance. Daniel arrived 30 minutes later, keys in one hand, duffel in the other. He didn't even ask what happened. He just looked at the broken frame, the scorched fireplace, the officers taking notes. And then he looked at Judith. I'm going to the Marriott, he said. His voice was flat. I'll get the rest of my things next week. Judith gave a small nod. There's leftover roast in the fridge. Take it with you. He blinked once, said nothing, and left. Alyssa was gone before sunrise, escorted off the property in the back of a cruiser, red-eyed and screaming at no one in particular. Judith sat in the quiet after. The room smelled like ash and wine and the metal tang of rage. She walked to the hearth and stared at the blackened photo remnants, just enough left to see part of George's jacket sleeve, a sliver of her veil. She used the fireplace poker to rake the pieces together, then walked to the kitchen and retrieved an empty coffee can. She swept the ashes in slowly, deliberately. By 8 a.m., Gina called. She laid hands on something important? Judith answered without pause. Our wedding photo. She burned it. That's all I need. Gina said. "We'll file for the emergency restraining order by noon." Judith hung up, her eyes locked on the silver canister in her lap. No more pretending. No more maneuvering. This wasn't passive anymore. This was war, and she had fire now, too. The fireplace was clean now. Judith had scrubbed the soot out herself, not because anyone expected her to, but because some things couldn't be delegated. Grief, for one, dignity, for another. It had been a week since the police car disappeared down Oak Stream Drive with Alyssa in the back seat, a week since Daniel left for the Marriott without looking back, and 5 days since Judith placed the coffee can filled with photo ash and brass fragments on George's old workbench in the garage, sealing it with a label, "Legacy Reclaimed." She hadn't spoken much. Not to the neighbors who left sympathetic voicemails, not to the church ladies who offered freezer meals with too much salt, not even to Gina, aside from one text. "Let me know when the hearing is scheduled." She just moved quietly through the house and, for the first time in years, made it hers again. Her suite was the first to transform. She started with the drapes, the hideous beige ones Alyssa had insisted on, clean lines, neutral tones, were replaced with soft periwinkle linen, bought off Etsy from a woman in Vermont. Judith rehung her oil paintings with a hammer George had labeled "just right weight" in Sharpie. Her sewing cabinet came out of storage. Her recliner returned to the window's glow. The kitchenette got a new rug, deep maroon with fringe, too old-fashioned for Alyssa's taste and exactly right for hers. When the final nail went into the wall, Judith stood back and let herself feel the silence. Not the kind filled with fear or waiting. The kind that meant ownership. That afternoon, a knock came. She opened the door to find a small arrangement of daisies and blue thistle in a mason jar, hand-delivered. A note dangled from a twine bow. To Judith, steel underneath silk. Reggie. She placed them beside her wedding band, which hadn't fit for years but never left the house. The silver looked soft in the morning light. Faded, but unbent. "That night," Gina called with a clipped edge to her voice, "Alyssa's license is officially revoked, permanently, no hearing, no appeal." Judith allowed herself a single, soundless nod. The phone buzzed against her ear as Gina kept going, filing updates, hearing dates, depositions still to come. But Judith wasn't really listening. Her eyes were on the corner of the den, where George's shadow still seemed to settle around 6 p.m. She whispered, "They won't sell what we built. Not while I'm breathing." On Friday, Daniel showed up at the front porch, hair uncombed, tie askew, holding a plain envelope in one hand and looking like he'd aged 10 years in 7 days. Judith didn't invite him in. He cleared his throat, didn't meet her eyes. I wanted to return the house key, and this." He held out the envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter, 2 pages. His handwriting still slanted the same way it did when he was 10, writing "sorry" for tracking mud through the hallway. "I know I failed you," he said. "I just didn't know how to stop it once it started." Judith didn't speak, just took the envelope and stepped back. Daniel blinked like he expected more, but Judith had given enough. She closed the door with a quiet click. "Later that evening," Gina texted, hearing scheduled, "January 9th, courtroom B, will be ready." Judith read the message once, then again. She closed her phone, folded her quilt back, pulled the envelope from the drawer and slipped Daniel's letter inside George's cedar chest, and sat in the armchair beside the fireplace, legs tucked beneath her, watching the flames. No photo, no frame, just fire, and a woman finally ready to step into it, not to burn, but to testify. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was as precise as a scalpel when she delivered the ruling. Based on submitted recordings, verified IP traces, signed affidavits, and the misuse of Ms. Hartman's Social Security number, the court finds clear and convincing evidence of undue influence, elder exploitation, and fraudulent refinance activity. Title to the property will revert to Judith E. Hartman. All encumbrances caused by the contested refinance are nullified. The mortgage is declared in default. Respondents must vacate the premises within 14 calendar days. There was a murmur behind them, just noise in the gallery. Judith didn't blink, didn't nod, just adjusted the shawl over her shoulders and laced her fingers together. Alyssa's mouth fell open. Daniel's shoulders sagged like a puppet cut loose. Outside the courtroom, Gina handed Judith the stamped documents. Final copies. Blue ink, gold seal. "Everything you need is right here," Gina said, tapping the folder. Judith looked up at the sun through the glass-paneled doors. "I've always preferred clean lines on paper." The moving truck arrived 4 days later. Judith sat in her usual spot on the front porch, mug of black coffee in one hand, cane balanced neatly beside her. She watched as the crew in gray uniforms hauled out the flat-pack dining table, the chrome-legged chairs, the abstract art Alyssa once described as statement pieces. The house groaned with relief. Daniel came down the walkway, box under one arm. He didn't look up. Alyssa followed, phone pressed to her ear, barking instructions to someone. Maybe her brother, maybe her realtor, maybe the void. At one point she stopped just inside the foyer and looked over at Judith. "You really think this makes you strong?" she said, voice brittle. "Taking back a broken house? Watching your son fall apart?" Judith sipped her coffee. "I think strength is watching something break and still sitting upright." Alyssa stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You know he's all I had left. I married the man, not the house." "You married convenience," Judith said softly, "and when it turned into consequence, you threw glass instead of apologies." "You're cruel," Alyssa whispered. "You always were. You just wrapped it in silence and cardigans." Judith stood then, slowly, methodically. Her cane met the floor with a clean, final tap. "You burned my wedding photo. I'm still here." For a split second, Alyssa looked young, uncertain. Then the walls came back up, and she stormed out the front door, snapping at the movers to wrap the mirror in 2 layers, not 1. By mid-afternoon, the house was quiet again. Judith walked through the echoing rooms, bare shelves, hollow walls, a stripped-down kitchen with only her teapot on the counter. She ran her palm across the empty mantel. Later that evening, Gina called. "Title office confirmed," she said. "It's official. Your name is the only one on the deed, and the lien is erased." Judith closed her eyes for a moment. "No one can unbuild what was never theirs." "Are you okay?" Gina asked. Judith looked out the window where the last moving van turned off Oak Stream Drive. "I'm something better than okay," she said. "I'm still home." That night, as wind brushed against the eaves and moonlight turned the den to silver, Judith opened her journal. January 23rd, 8:14 p.m. "They're gone. It's quiet. Not empty. Mine." She capped the pen and placed it beside her mug. Down the hallway, she could still hear the faint echo of voices, memories that hadn't yet learned they weren't welcome anymore. But in the morning, she'd open new curtains, and those echoes would fade. Because some losses hollow you out, and some clean the space for something real. The knock came just after dawn. Not a polite tap, not a neighbor's check-in. It was the unmistakable cadence of authority, 3 firm raps, then a pause, then one more to make sure. Judith stood at the edge of her hallway, robe tied tight, watching through the sidelight window as 2 uniformed officers waited on the porch. A third hovered at the curb, one hand resting near his belt. Gina had warned her this might happen fast. By the time Judith unlocked the door, Daniel was already jogging up the sidewalk in yesterday's shirt and sagging khakis, hair uncombed and panic visible from the mailbox. "What's going on?" he gasped. One officer held up a folded warrant. "Are you Daniel Hartman?" Daniel froze. "We're not here for you, but we need to speak with Alyssa Hartman." She's not here," he said, breath ragged. "She moved out 2 weeks ago." "Do you know her whereabouts?" He looked to Judith. Judith answered without flinching. "Her sister's in Evansville. She may be staying there. I can give you the address." The officer nodded and stepped back. "Please do." By midday it was on the news. Local realtor arrested in multi-count fraud case, forgery, identity theft, financial exploitation of an elder. Judith didn't need to watch the clip. She already knew the footage. Alyssa in sweatpants, sunglasses, head down, sliding into the back of another cruiser like it was déjà vu with handcuffs. This time, there'd be no slap on the wrist. Gina had filed the probate fraud case alongside the property charges. The combination was fatal to Alyssa's career. Her license was already gone. Now her reputation followed. Judith folded her newspaper and set it on the porch table. She sipped her tea. Let the steam warm her face. Daniel came by that evening, not asking for anything at first, just sat on the porch railing, eyes bloodshot. "I lost the condo," he said quietly. "They foreclosed last week." Judith said nothing. He exhaled hard. "I'm on unpaid leave. HR said they're reviewing my handling of the refinance." Still, she waited. Finally, he spoke the question he'd come to ask. "Can I crash here? Just until I find something steady. Just the couch." She didn't nod. But she didn't say no either. She stood, walked inside, and returned 5 minutes later with a folded quilt, a pillow, and one of George's old flannel shirts. She handed them over. "The couch pulls out. I expect it folded back each morning." Daniel blinked. "You're serious?" "I'm not offering forgiveness," she said evenly. "I'm offering roofline." He nodded, ashamed. "Thank you." Judith closed the screen door behind her. That weekend, Reggie pulled up in his pickup with a tool belt around his waist and a bag of Dunkin' in one hand. "Figure if you're changing locks," he said, "you might as well have a jelly stick." Judith chuckled once. Soft, unexpected. "I was going to offer you frozen casserole, but that sounds better." They worked together in the early chill, swapping out deadbolts on every door. Reggie said little, just handed her screws when needed and told her which screwdriver was the one with bite. As he secured the last strike plate, he looked over. "You know," he said, "some people lose everything and never get back up." Judith tucked the key into her palm. "Some people weren't raised by George Hartman." Reggie smiled. He'd be proud. Of the locks, too. Solid work. She patted his shoulder. "Thanks for helping me seal it shut." By Monday, the neighborhood changed in quiet ways. Mrs. Kim from 2 doors down brought over lemon bars. No explanation, just left them on the porch in a Tupperware with "Stay Strong" scrawled on a sticky note. One of the kids who used to bike through Judith's lawn rang her bell to apologize for cutting across too fast. Even Jill from the HOA stopped by with her dog in tow and said, "If you ever run for board president, I'll second it." Judith smiled but didn't respond. She'd never needed titles, she just needed the truth to stand still long enough for her to catch it. That night, she unlocked her journal. January 30th, 9:46 p.m. She's in custody. He's on my couch, and I'm still standing. But tomorrow, I change the locks inside myself, because doors aren't the only things they tried to take, and I'm not done reclaiming, not yet. The lockbox had sat untouched in the back of the linen closet for nearly a decade, heavy, steel, wrapped in an old beach towel Judith had always hated but never thrown away, the kind of thing you saved because someone else once thought it mattered. That morning, with the house quiet and the February light slanting through the front windows, Judith pulled the towel away and carried the box to her suite. Her knees didn't ache as much now, or maybe they did, and she'd stopped listening. She set it on the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out the brass key George had taped to the back of their wedding photo years ago. She turned it once, click, and the lid gave way with a long, whispering sigh. Inside were folded papers, faded photographs, and a single ivory envelope with her name in George's handwriting. Sharp, steady strokes. Blue ink. Judith opened it carefully. Inside, one line, written above the signature. "Never let them take your name off the deed." She smiled. It wasn't a metaphor to him. George had meant it literally. Their first home had been taken from his mother in a probate mess when he was 12. He'd built his life around that one. Simple commandment. Judith ran a fingertip over the words, then folded the letter back into thirds and slid it into the top of the lockbox, resting above Daniel's recent apology. She hadn't read that one yet. Wasn't sure she ever would. Some truths needed to settle before they were examined. Like ash. Like concrete. That afternoon, she stepped into a storefront tucked between a bike shop and a bakery off Main, Tri-County Women's Legal Shelter. Gina had introduced her to the director 2 weeks earlier. Now Judith sat behind the intake desk once a week, helping women fill out restraining orders and tenant claims. She brought lemon cookies on Wednesdays, wore cardigans with sleeves she could roll when the copier jammed. No one asked about her past, and she never gave more than a smile and a clipboard. But once, when a younger woman trembling over an affidavit asked, "Do you really think people can change?" Judith simply said, "Some can, but some get out so you don't have to wait and find out." The woman blinked at her, then nodded. That was enough. Reggie stopped by the next Sunday with a new box of screws and a joke about fixing the metaphorical fence. They had coffee on the porch, said little, watched a squirrel try and fail to climb the frost-dampened bird feeder pole. When Reggie reached out and adjusted the Afghan across Judith's knees, she didn't flinch, but she didn't move closer either. "You're a fortress," he said after a while, voice low. "I was a blueprint first," she replied. He chuckled. "Want company at the home improvement store this week?" "I might. Just say when." They didn't name anything that didn't need naming. That evening, Judith walked through the house, not to check anything, just to exist in it. Like breath filling a set of lungs it had nearly forgotten. Daniel had moved out 2 days prior, the couch cushions reshaped and folded with care. He hadn't asked for a send-off. He'd left a note, taped to the mirror inside another envelope marked, "Mom." She took it and placed it inside the lockbox without opening it. Some locks were better left sealed until their weight felt right, maybe forever. That night, she wrote her final entry. February 12th, 10:18 p.m. They tried to redraw me into silence, but I was built in ink, and now the deed bears only one name, still mine, forever legible. Outside, wind curled through the dormant branches. Inside, a woman sat alone in a house full of light, and nothing, not silence, not memory, not loss, had the power to evict her now.